On September 11, 2001, a bunch of terrorists hijacked planes and slammed them into the Twin Towers in the US. Then some big shot from the Middle East casually pops up and claims responsibility. President George W. Bush publicly vows to go after the terrorists to the ends of the earth, and basically tells every country on the planet, pick a side. You're either with the US or with the terrorists. Middle Eastern countries, you better think hard. Iraq's vice president, Tariq, hurriedly tells Saddam to suck up to America. Just shout we hate terrorists one time and Iraq will be safe. But Saddam, who was famously tough and used to fighting odds like 1 versus 34, wasn't about to grovel for anyone. He basically said, if America's gonna fight terrorists, that's their problem, none of my business. Bush didn't like that. He publicly declared that anyone could run Iraq, anyone but Saddam. Just because of that one line, Saddam ended up labeled as part of the axis of evil. For months after the US invaded Afghanistan, Bush started yelling that he had intelligence saying Saddam might launch a second terror attack on the US, so Saddam had to be dealt with. The US began courting the Kurds, the folks Saddam had chased up into the mountains a decade earlier, hoping the Kurds would help topple him. The Kurds were like, are you kidding? 10 years ago we followed your advice and got chased into caves. We're not buying your sugarcoating now. If you want Saddam gone, do it yourself. Bush, apparently holding a personal grudge against Saddam, or maybe it's daddy issues, was determined to bring him down. Secretary of State Colin Powell advised, you don't have to get your hands dirty, manufacture a pretext. Claim Saddam has weapons of mass destruction, invite inspectors, then use the inspections as cover to justify taking action. Bush pushed the UN Security Council to authorize inspections. Iraq's UN rep went white as a sheet and told Saddam. Now Saddam had a dilemma. If he flat out refused inspections, the US would say he's hiding something and invade. If he accepted, any little thing could be spun into proof he was lying. Turns out Saddam had tucked away a few things after the Gulf War. Not a full arsenal, but enough to worry him. He agreed to let inspectors in, and had his people try to destroy the leftover stash overnight. America didn't care whether Saddam actually had those toys. They were already drafting war plans and had turned Saddam's own foreign minister, Sabri, into an informant. Sabri started feeding the US reports, exact missile counts, predictions that Saddam would have nukes in 2 years. Years later, Sabri admitted the reports didn't say that. The CIA had doctored them. And honestly, how would a foreign minister even know secret defense details? But the US kept saying Saddam had WMDs, Britain joined in, Photoshop skills at the ready, and presto, evidence appeared. The UN gave Saddam 30 days to destroy all WMDs. Saddam, in a tearful attempt at compliance, compiled a 12,000-page report trying to prove he had nothing. Bush skimmed a few pages and declared the report vague, branded Saddam incorrigible, and said he was hiding WMDs. Powell even held up some mysterious cylinder in front of the UN to make his case and played a recording of Iraqi officials ordering soldiers to check for WMDs. The Iraqi rep in the audience lost it. The so-called WMD launcher in the tape was a 20-year-old device used to fire chemical shells in the Iran war, and the raw material was long gone. But who was counting details? The US certainly wasn't he. Meanwhile, the US quietly sent 3,000 troops to the region and started saying the whole world was looking to them to act. French President Jacques Chirac actually told France not to follow the US into making a fool of themselves. Russia and France, both with veto power at the UN, could have blocked the unauthorized invasion. Bush, not wanting to sweat the UN, ran up Tony Blair and asked the UK to stand by him. Tony Blair, ever the loyal younger brother, awkwardly agreed and gave Saddam 48 hours to get out of Iraq or face the US-UK invasion. Saddam, already pushed to the limit, considered fighting. But across Iraq, there were a dozen moving parts. Defected Iraqi officials who had been bought off by the US, Kurdish leaders, Shiite factions, exiles like Chalabi, and Saddam loyalists. At the 48-hour mark, the US-led coalition launched the invasion. 3 weeks in, US tanks rolled into Baghdad and Saddam took off. Retired US General J. Garner was sent in as a temporary overseer. He didn't want to be a conqueror, just wanted to find someone to run the country so he could retire. Iraqi exiles and factions immediately popped up demanding power. The Kurds, who wanted autonomy, were like, "We told you so." Shiite and Sunni leaders were jockeying for position. Old Saddam enemies smelled opportunity. The US cobbled together a temporary government of 7 Iraqi leaders, with Paul Bremer as the head. Bremer was a complete unknown to most Iraqis, and the new 7 didn't exactly inspire confidence. Bremer inherited a mess. Saddam had skipped town and left the army unpaid for months. 100,000 soldiers had not been paid for half a year. The army bosses demanded money. Bremer asked Washington for cash to pay the troops. Bush wasn't thrilled about reimbursing Saddam's mess, and instead Bremer disbanded the Iraqi army. That move detonated everything. The unpaid soldiers revolted. Some joined resistance groups, and within a month, there were dozens of car bombs and ambushes. In the first month after disbanding the army, 88 US soldiers were killed by roadside bombs, and over the next decade, a huge share of US casualties were from such attacks. According to this telling, it all started because the US refused to give $20 to each Iraqi soldier as a settling-in payment. Also, many Iraqis didn't become thankful for America just because a few dollars were handed out. Sunnis were furious at the Shiite ascendancy, and the US favored Shiite politicians, which inflamed sectarian tensions. The Kurds and Shiites were courted by the US, and the Sunnis felt left out. The US tried to set things up, bring in the UN, mediate, restore order. The UN sent a bigwig mediator, Sergio Vieira de Mello, who confidently said he could sort things out. But then a suicide bomber killed de Mello in the UN headquarters. The UN mission left, and it was clear the UN couldn't fix this mess. Bremer, exhausted and losing control, announced the elections within 2 years. Bush, impatient, demanded a quicker timetable and pressured Bremer to get things settled earlier. Iraqi factions ignored Bremer. Shiites, Sunnis, Baathists, exiles, militia leaders. Everyone was angling for influence. Bremer eventually handed over authority to al-Alawi, not because Alawi was the best choice, but because he could sit and talk with Bremer calmly without causing a scene. The other Iraqi leaders didn't even know Alawi. Muqtada al-Sadr and other militia leaders kept fighting. The US propped up Alawi and later Nouri al-Maliki as pliable leaders. The Americans wanted Maliki because he fled to Syria instead of Iran during Saddam's time, proof in their eyes that he wasn't Iran's puppet. Bush even paraded Maliki as America's son in Iraq. But Iraqis didn't respect the US-installed leaders. Sadr renamed the district Sadr City and openly defied the government. The US tried to back Maliki by using force and by arming certain militias, playing local factions of each other. At one point, the US quietly armed Shiite groups to beat down Sunnis, then parachuted in help to prop up Sunnis against Shiites, and paid insurgents to join the government forces. Chaos, manipulation, and short-term fixes. Eventually, the violence spiraled. Militias and sectarian killings tore the country apart. ISIS, the later infamous Islamic State, emerged from all this instability. Shiite leader Jafari temporarily took power as an interim prime minister, which emboldened Shiite factions and enraged Sunnis. The Sunnis struck back, even attacking Shiite holy sites like the Askari Mosque to provoke sectarian war. The US, meanwhile, was caught in a cycle of installing puppet leaders, trying to clean up after its own interventions, and then being blamed for the mess. When Bush declared the mission accomplished and announced US withdrawal, an Iraqi journalist famously threw a shoe at him in protest. The crowd's message was clear: who caused this chaos? Bush should take responsibility. The whole thing had been a giant political mess from the start.